The last train left Zurich with the slow, dutiful patience of something that had done this too many nights in a row. Its windows held the station lights like pale coins. When it slipped into the dark, it took the city with it, leaving only the countryside and the careful, internal noise of the carriage. Fabric breathing, plastic creaking, the occasional soft scrape of a shoe against grit. Mara sat alone at the far end, a coat still buttoned against warmth she no longer felt. Her suitcase stood upright between her boots, handle extended like a small raised arm, asking a question no one wanted to answer. On her lap lay the letter she had not opened. Cream envelope. Clean, machine-printed address. The kind of thing that had once meant bank statements, health insurance, reminders to be responsible. This one wore her name, and beneath it an address that should not have existed anymore. The envelope had arrived at her apartment that morning without a stamp, without the tender scuffs of travel. The postmark area sat blank, as if the universe had simply set it down on her welcome mat and waited for her to notice. When she'd held it under the kitchen light, the paper had felt too thick and too dry, like something that had never known air. The flap sealed without glue shine. The return address printed in the upper corner. Kellerhaus, Brunwald. A house name, not a street. Brunwald wasn't on her maps. Not on her phone, either. The search results had offered nothing but hiking routes with the same root word. Forest wells, mossy streams. Still, she recognized the house name the way a body recognizes a smell before the mind decides whether it belongs. Kellerhaus. Cellar house. Her father used to say that word as if it were a joke. An old family property, neglected, a relic. A place you didn't go to unless you liked splinters and drafts. Unless you wanted to hear your own footsteps accuse you of being alive. He'd said it a handful of times during her childhood, mostly when the topic of inheritance hovered at the edges of conversation like a fly no one dared swat. Then he'd stop saying it. Then he'd stop calling. 2 weeks ago, a number she didn't know had left a voicemail that contained only breathing. Slow, close, wet with a microphone. No words, no name. When she listened a second time, she thought she heard something else underneath, far back. A dull, repeated knock like wood on wood. She deleted it. She'd told herself the world was full of strange people and pocket dials. She'd gone to work. She'd smiled at colleagues who moved through life with tidy assumptions. Then this envelope. Then the second one, in the afternoon, delivered the same way. No stamp, no postmark. Addressed to Mara Keller, a name she had never used and never would. Her mother had been Mara Vogel. Her father had been Keller, yes, but Mara had changed her name at 18 to cut the final thread. To be unfindable. To be new. The mail had found her anyway. Inside the second envelope had been a single key and a thin strip of paper that read, "You left something in the cellar." No signature, no date, no plea, not even the cheap courtesy of punctuation beyond the period, the little pressed that made it sound like a sentence from a textbook, like a fact. She hadn't planned to leave that same night. She'd stared at the key until dusk came and turned it dull. She'd held it in her palm, and the metal had been colder than it should have been. She'd tried it in her apartment door. It didn't fit. She tried it in the cellar door at the end of the building hallway, where the smell changed and the light was always wrong. It didn't fit there either. When she put it down on the counter, it stayed cold. When she picked it up again, it seemed a little heavier, as if it were filling itself with purpose. At 9:30, she locked her apartment and left without packing anything beyond the suitcase that had been waiting, half unzipped, half full, from some earlier promise to travel. Now the train carried her into a region where the station names grew shorter and the lights between stops stretched farther apart. At each station, the doors opened with a sigh, and air slid in that smelled of wet leaves and diesel and distant animal warmth. No one entered her carriage. No one left. The conductor came once, moving down the aisle with a practiced neutrality. He paused at her seat. His gaze went to her ticket, then her face. His eyes flicked down to the envelope on her lap, to the printed return address. And for the first time his expression did something that almost became concern. It didn't make it. He punched the ticket anyway. The little metal teeth bit down with a sound like an insect being crushed. He slid the paper back to her with 2 fingers, as if it were delicate for the wrong reason, and continued down the aisle without looking over his shoulder. Mara watched him go, feeling the small, unreasonable impulse to call after him. Not for help exactly, for acknowledgement, for someone else's voice to place a coordinate on the night and make it behave. She didn't. She waited. She listened to the train's steady violence against the rails, the way it insisted forward no matter what waited at the end. At the final stop, the train did not so much arrive as give up. The platform lay empty beneath a single sodium lamp. The station building was a low, pale rectangle with windows that reflected nothing, as if the glass had been painted. Beyond the platform edge, the forest began immediately. Black trunks and indistinct undergrowth pressed close like a crowd. A sign bore the name Brunwald in neat, official letters. Mara stepped down, suitcase bumping after her. The train doors closed behind her with the crisp indifference of a verdict. The engine pulled away, and within seconds the light ribbon of windows vanished into the trees. Silence rushed in to fill the space. Not the gentle silence of snow, but the layered silence of things that listened. She stood under the lamp, and her breath made a faint cloud, brief and embarrassed. Her phone showed a weak signal that blinked as if uncertain whether to commit. The map app spun and spun, then offered her a blank grid where roads should have been. A narrow path began at the far end of the platform, marked by a wooden post with an arrow. No distances, no icons. Just the arrow pointing into the dark and a small carved symbol beneath it, a square with a line through it, like a door barred from the outside. Her hand closed around the key in her pocket. The metal pressed into her skin, an accusation, a reminder. She walked. The path was cinder at first, then packed dirt, then something older, stones set unevenly as if by a hand that didn't care about straight lines. The forest swallowed the lamp's reach within a few steps. The darkness ahead was not empty. It had texture, like velvet stretched too tight. Branches leaned over the path, not low enough to strike her face, but low enough to make her duck, to make her conscious of how tall she was, how much space her body demanded. The trees crowded close, trunks slick with lichen, their bark pale in places like skin scarred by old burns. Somewhere to her right, water moved, small, persistent, the sound of something making its way down without complaint. The suitcase wheels failed almost immediately. The stones and roots turned their neat rotation into a brutal clatter, and then one wheel snagged and snapped with a sound like a knuckle breaking. Mara stopped, stared down at the broken plastic, and felt a tight laugh rise that never reached her throat. She abandoned the suitcase and carried it by the handle, the dead wheel dragging in the dirt behind her like a limp foot. The path climbed. The air thinned, cooled. Her ears began to feel as if they were filling with pressure. When she swallowed, something clicked inside her skull. The forest scent, wet soil, rot sap, grew sharper like someone turning a knob. Then through the trees she saw it. At first, it was only geometry, a roofline against the sky, a block of darkness denser than the forests. Then the shape resolved into a house. Keller House sat on a rise above the path, half hidden by trees. It was larger than any memory she might have assembled from her father's dismissive stories. 3 stories, gables like clenched teeth, windows arranged with a kind of old-fashioned symmetry that should have been comforting and wasn't. The roof was steep, slate like the back of a reptile. The walls were pale, plaster or stone, but stained with long vertical streaks as if rain had been dragging soot down for years. No lights showed in the windows. The house did not look abandoned. It looked waiting. A low stone wall surrounded the front, its gate open as if someone had forgotten to close it, or as if it had never been meant to close at all. The courtyard beyond held a few dead shrubs, their branches twisted like hands. A well stood near the center, capped with a wooden lid that sagged slightly at the edges. The air around it was colder. Mara's boots scraped on gravel as she approached. The sound felt too loud, as if the night objected to being disturbed. The front door stood under a shallow porch, heavy wood with iron straps that had turned the color of old blood. A brass plate near the frame bore a name she didn't want to read and read anyway. Keller House. Her hand hovered over the door handle. Not fear exactly, a sensation more intimate, the way one hesitates before touching a scar. She tried the handle. It turned without resistance. The door opened on a breath of air that tasted of cold stone and something faintly sweet, like fruit left too long in a bowl. The house smelled lived in and not lived in at once. Dust and wax and the ghost of heat. Inside, darkness pooled thickly. Her phone screen flared when she turned on the flashlight, casting a narrow cone that made the hallway appear in slices. Wood paneling, a coat rack with empty hooks, a faded runner rug pattern with shapes that might have been flowers once. The ceiling rose higher than expected, the space giving her the uncomfortable sense that the house was bigger on the inside than it had any right to be. The front hall forked, a staircase climbing into shadow, and a corridor disappearing to the left. Directly ahead, a doorway stood open onto a room that might have been a parlor. She caught a glimpse of a high-backed chair, a draped sofa, a table with something white laid across it. A sheet. No, not a sheet. A tablecloth, or something like it. She stepped in, lights searching. A long dining table stretched the length of the room, set as if for guests. Plates, cutlery, glasses that caught her phone's glare and threw it back in sharp points. Candles in brass holders, unlit but new enough to look unused. At the far end, a centerpiece of dried flowers sat in a bowl, brittle petals arranged with careful hands. The flowers were not the kind sold at markets. They were small, pale with spines. A place was set at the head of the table. A single plate, a single knife and fork, a single glass, and, at that place, a folded card. Mara approached, each step measured. The floorboards did not creak, which made her unease deepen. Old houses always complained. She lifted the card. Her name, written in ink that shimmered slightly, as if the letters were wet and not wet. Mara, no last name. The handwriting wasn't her father's, not her mother's, not anyone she knew. Beneath the card, a small envelope lay waiting, thick and heavy. It had been sealed with wax. The seal bore the same carved symbol from the station post, a square with a line through it. Her thumb pressed into the wax. It cracked too easily like sugar. She opened the envelope and drew out a single photograph. It was old, black and white, edges scalloped. A family portrait in front of this very house. A man and a woman standing stiffly, a child between them. The man's face was turned slightly, caught mid-blink, giving him a look of exhaustion. The woman's hand rested on the child's shoulder. The child stared directly into the camera with an expression too calm for their small body. Mara's grip tightened until the photograph bent. The child in the photo wore her face. Not a resemblance. Not a family echo. Her face precisely. The same mole near the left brow. The same slight asymmetry in the lips. Even the hair, though shorter, fell in the same stubborn wave. Her flashlight beam trembled, making the image seem to move. On the back of the photograph, in the same shimmering ink as the card, a message had been written. You came back. A faint sound rose from somewhere beneath the house. Soft, rhythmic, patient. Wood on wood. A knock. Then another. Then, from the hallway outside the dining room, the slow squeal of a door opening, its hinges finally deciding to speak. Mara turned, the light jerking toward the doorway. The beam caught the edge of the hall, the runner rug, the coat rack, still empty, and at the far end, where the corridor fell away into darkness, a thin line of blackness widening as something moved, unseen, into the house's core. The knocking continued beneath her feet, steady as a heartbeat, and the air, cold and sweet, seemed to inhale. The sound from below did not rush. It persisted with the confidence of something that had all the time it needed. Each knock rose through the floorboards as a vibration first, then a sound, then a sensation that settled behind Mara's sternum like a second, slower heart. She stood frozen in the dining room, the photograph still in her hand. The beam of her phone light wavered across the table's setting, catching on glass rims and knife edges. The place at the head of the table seemed closer now, as if the room had subtly rearranged itself while she wasn't watching. The folded name card lay open, the ink glistening faintly, breathing. The corridor beyond the dining room was darker than it should have been. Not unlit. Her flashlight cut into it, but dense, as though the air itself had weight. The sound of the opening door had ceased, yet the feeling of something newly unsealed lingered, like a draft that touched skin without moving hair. Mara forced her feet to move. The photograph slid back into the envelope. She did not look at it again. Some instincts did not need logic to justify themselves. She stepped into the corridor, her light revealing framed pictures along the walls. Landscapes, portraits, still lives. They were arranged with careful symmetry, frames polished, glass clean. Nothing abandoned here. Nothing forgotten. As she passed the first frame, her reflection skated across the glass and lagged. She stopped, turned back. The reflection behaved again, obedient, dull. Her face looked paler than it had in the dining room, as if the house had already begun to subtract something. She continued. The corridor sloped gently downward, imperceptibly at first, then enough that she became aware of the angle in her calves. The air cooled with every step. The knocking below grew louder, closer, less muffled by distance. It did not accelerate. It did not grow impatient. A door stood halfway down the hall, ajar. From within came the faint smell of old paper and metal. Shelves lined the walls, packed tight with folders, ledgers, and bound volumes. A desk sat beneath a narrow window that looked not out into the night, but into stone, earth pressed so close it blocked the sky entirely. Mara stepped inside. The desk surface held neat stacks of documents weighted with smooth river stones. An oil lamp sat unlit, its glass chimney clouded with age. Beside it lay a leather-bound book, thicker than the others, its spine cracked and lovingly repaired. Her fingers brushed the cover. The book opened easily, as if it had been waiting. Inside, names filled the pages in careful script, each accompanied by dates, notes, annotations in different inks. Births, departures, returns. The margins were crowded with symbols she did not recognize but felt, viscerally, she had seen before, on the station post, on the wax seal, carved faintly into the desk's edge. She turned pages faster, breath shallow. The names repeated. Keller, Vogel, Keller again. Variations, hyphenations, names struck through and rewritten. Dates overlapping in ways that made her scalp prickle. Children born before parents, deaths preceding births, returns without departures. Then she found it. Her name, not once, but many times. Mara Keller, Mara Vogel, Mara Keller Vogel. The same name written in different hands with different dates. Some entries ended with a neat line. Others trailed off, the ink thinning as if the pen had run dry or been dragged away. Her phone light flickered. From beneath the floor came the knock again, louder now, close enough that she could feel it through the soles of her boots. The desk lamp rattled faintly in sympathy. Mara snapped the book shut. Behind her, the door creaked. She turned sharply, light flaring. The doorway stood empty, but the darkness beyond it seemed deeper than before, pressed close to the threshold like a held breath. The corridor sloped away, its far end lost in shadow that no longer reflected her beam properly. The house shifted, not dramatically, not enough to be certain, but the subtle sense of balance altered, as if the structure had adjusted itself around her weight, accommodating her presence the way a body adjusts around a swallowed thing. She backed out of the room, never taking her eyes from the dark beyond the doorframe. The knocking below had changed. The rhythm remained the same, but the sound now carried a faint scrape between impacts, like something being repositioned with care. The staircase rose at the end of the corridor, its banister polished smooth by generations of hands. Beneath it, a door waited, smaller than the others. Lower, its wood darker, swollen by damp. Iron hinges black with rust. A thin gap at the bottom leaked cold air that smelled of stone, earth, and something older, something sealed and unsealed too many times. The knocking came from behind that door. Mara stood at the threshold, key heavy in her pocket, the weight of the ledger still echoing in her arms. The house was very quiet now, as if listening for her decision, as if it had reached the part of the night it enjoyed most. The knocking stopped. From the other side of the cellar door came a sound that was not a knock at all, a slow, deliberate inhale. Mara did not reach for the door immediately. Stillness had become a kind of language in the house, and she did not want to speak out of turn. The inhale from behind the cellar door was long and careful, as though whatever drew breath, there was savoring the act. When the exhale came, it carried a faint vibration that crept into the banister and up into her palms where they rested against the wood. The iron latch on the door trembled, once then settled. Her phone light dimmed another fraction. The battery indicator winked at her like a closing eye. She slid the key from her pocket. Up close, the metal looked older than it had in her kitchen, its surface etched with fine scratches that might have been decorative or the result of long, repeated use. The bow of the key bore the same square and bar symbol, worn smooth by skin. When she brought it near the latch, the air between them felt charged, prickling faintly along her knuckles. The knocking did not resume. Mara inserted the key. The lock turned without resistance, smooth and well-oiled despite its age. There was no click of triumph, no dramatic release. The mechanism simply accepted the key, as if it had always been meant for this moment and nothing else. The door eased inward on its hinges. Cold poured out. Not a rush, not a blast. An enveloping presence that wrapped around her ankles and climbed, deliberate, along her calves. The cellar beyond swallowed the beam of her flashlight almost immediately. Stone steps descended into darkness, narrow and uneven, their edges worn concave by countless feet. The walls were close enough that she could touch both at once if she spread her arms. The smell was wrong. Not rot, not mold. Those would have been easier. This was clean, mineral, touched with that same faint sweetness she'd noticed at the threshold, like fruit preserved too carefully, kept just shy of decay. Mara stepped down. The door behind her swung shut without a sound. She froze, breath caught. Her hand shot back to the latch. The door did not yield. Not locked. She could feel the handle move, but held, as if the weight of the house pressed against it from the other side. The steps beneath her feet thrummed faintly. She descended. Each step was colder than the last. The walls glistened with moisture that reflected her light in dull smears. At the bottom, the cellar opened into a wider space, the ceiling low but the room broad, carved directly from stone. The floor was smooth, worn by time, and something else, movement that had been repeated often, in patterns. The knocking resumed, not from one place, but many. A rhythm rippled through the room, with striking wood, echoing from the walls themselves. Mara's light swung wildly, catching on wooden beams that crisscrossed the ceiling, on shelves cut into the stone, on objects arranged with ritual precision. Jars, dozens of them, hundreds. They lined the shelves and stood in careful rows along the walls, glass thick and old, sealed with wax that bore the familiar symbol. Inside each jar floated something pale, suspended in clear liquid. Some were small, barely more than shapes. Others were unmistakable, hands curled as if in sleep. Lengths of hair, still dark, fragments of bone smoothed to ivory. One jar held a pair of eyes. They were closed. The knocking was coming from the far end of the cellar, where a wooden frame stood upright like a door that led nowhere. Its surface was scarred with impact marks, darkened by age and use. The rhythm emanated from behind it, reverberating through the stone. Mara's pulse roared in her ears. The ledger's pages flashed in her mind. Names, returns, annotations trailing off. Her light dropped to the floor, and she saw the grooves worn into the stone, shallow arcs that led from the shelves to the frame and back again, over and over, as if something had been dragged along the same path for generations. The knocking stopped. A voice came instead, not spoken, pressed. It emerged inside her head with the intimacy of a memory, layered with the faint echo of stone and wood. You were gone longer this time. Mara staggered, hand bracing against the wall. The stone was warm. Her light flickered again, then steadied. The jars seemed closer now, their contents subtly rearranged, as if they leaned toward her. The wooden frame at the far end creaked, its surface bowing inward. We kept your place, the voice continued, patient, almost kind. We always do. The air in the cellar thickened, pressing against her chest, her throat. Images surfaced unbidden. A child standing in front of this house, eyes too calm. Hands guiding smaller hands down stone steps. A voice that sounded like hers and not hers, repeating a promise she did not remember making. Her gaze snagged on a jar near the frame. Inside floated a small object, unmistakable even through the distortion of glass and liquid. A key, identical to the one in her pocket. The wooden frame shuddered. A seam opened down its center, splitting slowly, revealing darkness behind it that did not reflect light at all. The knocking resumed, now accompanied by a wet, dragging sound, as if something were pulling itself forward with effort and care. Come closer, the voice pressed, and this time it carried weight. History, expectation, hunger shaped like duty. You left something unfinished. Mara took a step back. Her heel struck something solid. She looked down. Another jar, placed behind her without sound, its wax seal unbroken. Inside, suspended and pale, floated a face she knew better than her own reflection. Older, lined, eyes closed. Her father. The voice softened. He waited, just like we asked. The wooden frame split wider. Something began to emerge. Mara's breath came shallow, each inhale scraping cold across her throat. The jar at her feet seemed heavier than glass should allow, its contents suspended with unnatural grace. Her father's face floated within, peaceful in the way the dead are often arranged to appear, as if sleep were simply a matter of presentation. She did not touch the jar. The seam in the wooden frame widened with a sound like old timber being slowly torn apart by patient hands. The darkness behind it was not absence but density, layered and dimensional, as though it contained depth without space. The knocking had ceased, replaced by a slow, irregular scrape. Wood against stone, something hauling itself forward. The voice pressed again, closer now, more focused, as if narrowing its attention onto her alone. You always hesitate at this part. The words carried familiarity that stung. Not recognition, ownership. Mara backed away from the frame, her shoulder brushing the stone wall. The warmth there was more pronounced now, pulsing faintly like a living thing beneath skin. Her phone light dimmed further, the edges of the beam fraying. She forced it toward the emerging shape. At first she saw limbs. Not a body, not a single form, but an arrangement. Arms layered over arms, hands overlapping, fingers interlaced and reinterlaced as if they had been assembled, disassembled, and reassembled again. Skin tones varied subtly, shades that spoke of different lives, different times. Some hands were small, the nails bitten down. Others were large, knuckles thickened by labor. All of them bore the same faint scar at the base of the thumb, a pale crescent like a half-moon. The scar burned at the base of Mara's own thumb. She clenched her fist too late. The shape pulled itself farther through the frame. A torso followed, or something approximating one. Rib-like structures beneath stretched skin, breathing in a way that suggested the memory of lungs rather than their presence. The head emerged last. It wore her face. Not exactly. Not the way the photograph had. This face was older than she was now, and younger than her father had ever looked in her memory. The features shifted subtly as she watched, cheekbones sharpening, eyes deepening, mouth adjusting its line as if sampling versions. The eyes opened. They were her eyes, layered. Not two, but many, set one behind another, depths of gaze stacked like reflections between mirrors. They focused on her with careful attention. You see, the voice said, and this time it came from the mouth as well as her mind, the sound of it thick and wet with borrowed throats. We never lose you. We only wait. The thing took a step forward. Its movement was deliberate, respectful of the space, of the rules that govern this place. Its feet left dark impressions on the stone that did not fade. Mara's back hit the wall fully now. The jars crowded closer, glass chiming softly as they touched, a sound like distant bells. The air vibrated with restrained anticipation. You're not me, she said, and the words scraped her tongue raw. Speaking felt like tearing something loose that had been embedded too long. The thing smiled. The expression did not sit comfortably on its face. It was an approximation, practiced but imperfect. You say that every time. It gestured, hands unfolding, overlapping, separating again. The motion drew her attention unwillingly to the grooves in the floor, the paths worn by repetition. You leave. You forget. You rename yourself. And still, you return. Images surged around her, no longer contained. A child led down these steps by a woman whose face shifted between stranger and mother. A young woman standing at the wooden frame, hands trembling, carving the symbol into fresh wax. A man, her father, older, hollow-eyed, standing where she stood now, his gaze fixed on the thing with resignation rather than fear. He remembered longer than most, the voice murmured. That is why he lasted. The jar at her feet gave a faint clink. Mara slid sideways along the wall, searching for space, for exit, for anything that was not stone in history and expectation. Her fingers brushed something embedded in the wall, metal, cold, and familiar. A ring of keys hung there, half hidden in a recess. Dozens of them, all similar, all worn smooth. Some bore the square and bar symbol. Others were plain, their teeth filed down from use. The thing noticed. Its smile tightened. Those are not for you, it said, a thread of warning woven into the calm. You know which one belongs in your hand. Mara grabbed the ring anyway. The weight nearly pulled her arm down. The keys clattered, a bright, chaotic sound that shattered the cellar's careful quiet. Several jars cracked, thin lines spidering through their glass. Liquid seeped out, clear and glistening, carrying the faint scent of sweetness. The thing flinched. Not in pain, in surprise. Mara ran. She did not aim for the stairs. She ran past the frame, past the emerging thing, toward the back of the cellar where the stone wall curved inward. Her light swung wildly, catching on another door, narrow, iron-banded, nearly invisible against the rock. A service passage, perhaps, or something older. She slammed into its shoulder first. The door shuddered, held, then gave. Darkness swallowed her. Behind her, the thing's voice sharpened, losing its layered calm. Do not take what is not finished. Hands scraped against stone. The cellar roared with sound, jars shattering, liquid spilling. The knock transformed into a frantic battering. The door slammed shut behind her. Mara tumbled down a short flight of steps. Keys clutched her chest, breath tearing from her lungs. She landed hard on packed earth, the impact jarring her bones. Her phone skidded away, light extinguished. Total darkness. Then, faintly, from ahead, a draft of colder air, and the distant sound of running water. Mara lay still long enough for the darkness to stop moving. Pain mapped itself across her body in slow, methodical lines. Her shoulder, her hip, the base of her spine. Nothing felt broken. That felt like a small mercy she did not trust. The keys pressed in her chest, their cold biting through fabric. She shifted carefully, the metal chiming softly despite her efforts. The sound seemed obscene in the dark, too alive. Behind her, through the door she had fled, came the muffled chaos of the cellar. Glass breaking, wood splintering, the thing's many-limbed movements scraping and striking as it tried to follow. The door held. Barely. Each impact sent a tremor through the earth beneath her. Ahead, the air breathed. Cooler than the cellar, fresher, tinged with mineral damp and something green. The faint sound she'd noticed before resolved into water, moving over stone, patient and continuous. Mara pushed herself up. Her hands sank slightly into the ground, which was not stone here, but packed soil, cool and granular. She rose to a crouch, then to her feet, one hand braced against the tunnel wall. The passage was narrow, rough-hewn, its ceiling low enough that she had to hunch. No lanterns, no wiring. This had not been made for comfort or convenience. It sloped downward. She moved forward because standing still was no longer an option. The keys bumped against her ribs with each step, a constant reminder of weight and choice. As she walked, the sound from behind her changed, less frantic now, more focused. The battering on the door slowed, replaced by careful, deliberate pressure, as if the thing were testing, learning. You cannot leave through that way. The voice came, muted by earth but no less present. That path only goes where it must. Mara did not answer. Her breath fogged the darkness in front of her, brief ghosts vanishing as soon as they formed. She focused on the rhythm of her steps, the feel of the ground, the way the tunnel subtly curved, not in a straight line, but in a slow spiral, descending. Time lost coherence. The passage offered no markers, no sense of distance. Only the water grew louder, closer, until the tunnel widened abruptly and the floor dropped away. Mara stopped at the edge of a natural cavern. Water flowed through it in a narrow stream, clear and swift, cutting a channel through pale stone. The ceiling arched overhead, higher than the cellars, studded with mineral formations that caught what little light there was and reflected it faintly, as if remembering brightness. The air here was cold enough to sting. At the far side of the cavern, another tunnel rose upward. The stream passed between them. Mara knelt, dipping her fingers into the water. The cold shocked her skin, sharp and clean. When she pulled her hand back, droplets clung, luminous in the faint ambient glow. For a moment, only a moment, she thought she saw something beneath the surface, a dark shape moving against the current, swimming upstream. She withdrew her hand quickly. The keys felt heavier now. She slid the ring off her wrist and spread them across the stone, sorting by touch and faint reflection. Dozens of nearly identical shapes, their differences subtle. A filed edge here, a longer tooth there. One key slightly warmer than the others. The warm one pulsed faintly. She did not need to look at the symbol to know which it was. Mara set that key aside. She chose another at random and stepped toward the upward tunnel. Halfway across the cavern, the ground vibrated. The sound carried not through air, but through bone, a low resonance that made her teeth ache. From a tunnel behind her came the sound of stone breaking. The thing was coming through the earth itself. Cracks raced along the cavern wall, widening as something forced its way through. Hands emerged first, fingers digging into stone with practiced ease. Then arms, then the suggestion of a shoulder, forcing the rock to remember it was once pliable. This is the part where you run, the voice observed, layered with effort now. You always do. Mara broke in emotion. She leapt the stream, boots skidding on wet stone, and slammed into the upward tunnel. The chosen key was clenched in her fist, its teeth biting into her palm. She ran, lungs burning, the tunnel narrowing and widening unpredictably, forcing her to twist and duck. The ground sloped up sharply. Light appeared ahead. Not electric, not warm, but gray and diffuse. She burst out into open air. The night sky spread above her, low clouds smothering the stars. She stood in a ravine behind the Keller house, its walls steep and slick with moss. The house loomed above her to one side, its rear wall rising sheer, windows dark. The tunnel mouth yawned behind her. The thing did not emerge. Instead, the voice came again, closer than it should have been. You cannot outrun what is built into you. Mara stumbled back, turning in a slow circle. The ravine was not empty. Figures stood along its edges, half hidden in shadow, their forms indistinct but their posture unmistakable. Waiting, watching. Some were tall, some small. All bore the same faint crescent scar at the base of the thumb. Their faces shifted as the light changed. Men, women, children, old and young. Variations on a theme that led, inexorably, back to her. At the far end of the ravine, a narrow path climbed toward the forest. And blocking it, her father, not in a jar, standing, solid, his eyes open, fixed on her with an expression she had never seen before. Expectation. He raised his hand, revealing the scar. And behind him, the forest stirred. Mara's first instinct was denial. Not intellectual, not articulated, but bodily. Her muscles locked, her breath caught halfway in, as if her nervous system had rejected the possibility outright. Her father stood where memory insisted he should not. His posture was familiar in the most painful way. Weight shifted slightly onto one leg, shoulders held too stiff, as though bracing against a draft that no one else felt. The coat he wore was one she remembered from childhood winters, the wool frayed at the cuffs. Even the way his fingers curled when he raised his hand felt practiced, habitual. The scar at the base of his thumb was new. It shone faintly, the skin there smoother, younger, than the rest of his hand. The figures along the ravine's edges did not move. They watched with the stillness of things that had learned patience the hard way. The house above them loomed silent, its rear windows dark, giving no sign of the violence still contained beneath it. Mara took a step back. Her heel slid on damp stone. Pebbles clattered into the ravine's narrow stream below, their small sounds echoing too loudly. Her father's gaze tracked her movement. His eyes were wrong, not in shape or color, but in depth. They held a stillness she associated with the cellar jars, with things preserved past the point of life. He lowered his hand. Mara waited for him to speak, for the familiar cadence, the careful economy of his words, for the anger she'd learned to navigate, or the brittle humor he used when cornered. Nothing came. Instead, he turned his head slightly, as if listening. From the forest beyond him came a soft, collective sound, breathing, multiplied. The trees leaned inward, branches overlapping, their silhouettes forming a dark arch over the path that led away. The voice returned, no longer confined to one place. He did not want to come back, it said, threaded through the air, the ground, the space behind her eyes. Few do at first. Mara swallowed, forcing herself to look at her father's face fully. The lines there were accurate, painstakingly reproduced. Even a faint scar on his chin from an old accident was present. But the skin lacked something indefinable, elasticity, perhaps, or the subtle variation that came from blood moving beneath it. You waited, she said, and the words surprised her with their steadiness. They were not an accusation. They were a recognition. Her father nodded. The movement was slightly delayed, as if the instruction to nod had traveled a longer distance than it should have. His mouth opened, then closed again. A faint furrow appeared between his brows, a ghost of effort. He learned, the voice supplied gently. Eventually, Mara's grip tightened on the ring of keys still looped around her wrist. The chosen key, the one without the symbol, pressed into her skin. She became acutely aware of the other key, the warm one, still tucked away, still waiting. The figures along the ravine began to shift. Not forward, inward. Their attention narrowed, like a lens tightening focus. You can end this, the voice continued. You always could. Her father took a step toward her. The ground did not respond the way it should have. His foot did not compress the moss. It hovered for a fraction of a second, then settled, leaving no mark. Mara felt something inside her rearrange itself. "You're not finished," she said, and this time the words were meant for the thing behind the voice. "For the house. For the cellar. None of you are." Her father's expression changed. Not much. Just enough. Something like relief crossed his face. He reached into his coat and withdrew an object wrapped in cloth. He held it out to her, arms stiff, as if the gesture had been rehearsed and memorized rather than felt. The cloth slipped. It was a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth, its lid carved with the square and bar symbol. The same symbol now pulsed faintly at the base of her thumb, hot as a fresh brand. The ravine seemed to lean closer. "This is where you choose to stay," the voice said, "or where you learn how to leave correctly." Mara did not take the box. She looked past her father, into the forest. The path there was narrow, overgrown, barely a path at all, but she could see where it led, not in detail, not in certainty, but in implication. Movement, distance, a future that did not circle back on itself. The figures along the ravine raised their hands in unison. Every palm bore the scar. Her father's arms began to tremble, the box shaking slightly. His mouth opened again, wider this time. A sound emerged. Not a word, but a strained exhale, as if something inside him were being pulled taut. Mara reached in her pocket. Her fingers closed around the warm key. The moment she touched it, the ravine shuddered. The stream surged, water slapping hard against stone. The forest breathing grew louder, uneven. The voice sharpened. "That key does not open doors." Mara met her father's eyes. "It ends rooms," she said. She pressed the key into the scar at the base of her thumb. Light flared, white, searing total. The figure screamed without sound. The house above them groaned, and the wooden box in her father's hands split down the middle. The light did not fade. It folded. It collapsed inward with violent precision, as though the world had been pinched shut around the point where the key met Mara's skin. Sound followed a heartbeat later, stone cracking, wood tearing, a deep structural groan that came not from the house alone, but from the ground beneath it. Mara fell, not backward, not forward, down, through a sensation of space, losing agreement with itself. The ravine twisted, its walls stretching into vertical planes that slid past her like pages being torn from a book. The figures along the edges blurred, their forms elongating, unraveling into threads of motion and memory. Her father reached for her. His hand came apart mid-gesture. Not flesh tearing from bone, but something more conceptual. His arm divided into overlapping versions, each lagging behind the other, each wearing a different expression of the same face. One looked afraid. One looked relieved. One looked finished. The wooden box struck the ground and shattered, its fragments dissolving into dust before they could settle. From within spilled nothing. No contents, no relic, no core. Just absence shaped like expectation. The voice screamed. For the first time, it lost coherence. Its layered calm fractured into competing tones. Anger, urgency, something dangerously close to pleading. "You do not get to destroy what you are made of." Mara hit ground hard enough to drive the breath from her lungs. Stone bit into her back, her shoulders. The light dimmed at last, leaving behind a cavernous space that was not the cellar and not the ravine, but something between, an interior stripped of ornament, raw and exposed. The house was here, not above her, not around her, but as the space itself. Walls of timber and stone hung half-formed, beams intersecting at impossible angles. Staircases led nowhere. Doors floated without frames, opening and closing on nothing. The symbol, square and bar, burned faintly into every surface, repeated to the point of obsession. Mara pushed herself upright. The warm key was gone. The scar on her thumb remained, the skin there raw and bright, smoking faintly as if fresh from a burn. Pain radiated from it, sharp and clarifying. Around her, the figures reassembled. Not whole, not stable. They flickered between ages and identities, their outlines stuttering. Some were missing limbs. Some had too many. Their faces slipped and re-slid into configurations that never quite settled. Her father stood among them, less solid than before, his edges softening, his features losing definition. He looked at her, and for the first time, his expression was entirely his own. He shook his head, slow, regretful. The voice returned, quieter now, stretched thin. "This structure exists because it must. Because something must hold what you abandon." Mara stood, swaying slightly. The space resisted her movement, the floor tugging faintly at her boots, as if reluctant to let her go. "You didn't hold us," she said. Her voice echoed strangely, refracting off incomplete walls. "You reused us." The figures reacted as one, a ripple of tension passing through them. Some turned inward. Others looked toward doorways that did not lead anywhere. The house shuddered again. Beam split. A staircase collapsed in on itself, folding like wet cardboard. One of the floating doors slammed shut, vanishing as it did. "You were a load-bearing element," the voice insisted. "You always were." Mara laughed. The sound surprised her. It was rough, unpolished, but real. It cut through the space in a way the voice could not. "Then you built badly." She pressed her burned thumb against the nearest wall. The symbol there flared and then cracked, lines spidering outward as if the surface were glass. The crack raced along beams, across floors, into ceilings. With each fracture, the figures screamed, not in pain, but in recognition, as though a long-held truth were finally being spoken aloud. Her father stepped back. He was fading now, his outline thinning, his features blurring into impressions rather than details. As he receded, he met her eyes one last time and nodded. Not with the house began to collapse inward. Not falling, not exploding, but folding. Rooms collapsing into rooms, spaces consuming themselves, history compacting under its own weight. The voice howled, its words dissolving into noise, then into nothing at all. The ground beneath Mara's feet gave way. She fell again. This time, she landed on earth. Real earth. Cold. Solid. Unarguably present. She lay there, chest heaving, lungs burning, staring up at a sky that was not a ceiling pretending to be one. Clouds slid overhead, indifferent and vast. The forest stood around her, trees upright, unwarped, their leaves whispering in a wind that did not care who she was. Behind her, where the Keller house should have stood, there was only a scar of disturbed ground. Freshly turned soil, splintered roots, a shallow depression as if something heavy had been removed. No house, no ravine, no cellar, just a forest. Mara rolled on her side, then onto her knees. Her hand shook, her thumb throbbed, the burn already beginning to scab. In the distance, something moved. Footsteps. Careful. Human. She froze. The forest parted slightly ahead, and a figure emerged between the trees. Not one of the others. A woman, wrapped in a dark coat, her hair pulled back. Her face was tired, wary, unmarked by scars. In her hands, she held a flashlight and a folded map. Their eyes met. The woman frowned, confused. "Are you lost?" she asked. The sound of a normal human voice hit Mara harder than any collapse. Behind the woman, the forest remained silent, waiting. The question hovered between them, fragile as glass. Mara opened her mouth and found no answer ready. Words, it turned out, required a certain agreement with the world, a shared understanding of what had just happened, what still existed. Her chest rose and fell too fast, breath scraping as if her lungs were relearning how to work without instruction. The woman waited. Her posture held the cautious politeness of someone who had stumbled onto something strange, but not yet threatening. The flashlight beam dipped, then rose again, illuminating Mara's dirt-streaked coat, her scraped hands, the raw scab forming at the base of her thumb. "Yes," Mara said finally. The word felt provisional, but held. The woman nodded, accepting it without further inquiry. She stepped closer, boots crunching softly on leaf litter, and extended a hand. Mara hesitated only a fraction of a second before taking it. The grip was warm, solid, human. The contact grounded her in a way nothing else had. The forest did not ripple. The ground did not protest. No voices pressed in from behind her eyes. "I'm Lena," the woman said. "I was following a trail that shouldn't be on my map. Happens more than you'd think around here." Mara let herself be pulled to her feet. Her legs trembled but held. "I came from the station," Mara said. The truth, pared down. Brunwald. Lena's brow creased. "That station's been closed for years." Mara glanced back. Between the trees, there was no sign of tracks. No platform lights. No path worn by footsteps. Just undergrowth and roots and the gentle lie of a forest that had never been interrupted. "I thought so," Mara said. They walked together in silence at first, the forest slowly yielding a clearer path, as if embarrassed to have misled her earlier. The night air felt cleaner now, stripped of sweetness, stripped of memory. The further they went, the more Mara felt something loosen in her chest. An ache she hadn't known was there, easing its grip. "You're bleeding," Lena said eventually, nodding toward Mara's thumb. Mara looked down. The scab had split slightly, a thin line of blood welling bright against her skin. She pressed it absently against her coat. "It'll stop," she said. Lena studied her for a moment longer than necessary, then nodded. "There's a village about 20 minutes that way. Real one. Lights. People who ask too many questions, but not the wrong ones." They continued. As they walked, Mara became aware of an absence that felt almost loud. No pressure at the edges of her thoughts. No sensation of being observed from inside her own skin. The scar at her thumb pulsed once, then settled into a dull, ordinary pain. Something else surfaced instead. Memory. Not the invasive kind, forced and layered, but fragments drifting up on their own terms. Her childhood kitchen. The sound of her father's laugh before it turned sharp. A moment on a train years ago, watching a town recede and feeling, not fear, but relief. "You don't have to tell me what happened," Lena said quietly, as if sensing the shape of Mara's thoughts. "But you look like someone who just left a place that didn't want to let you go." Mara huffed a breath that might have been a laugh. Something like that. They reached the edge of the forest. Ahead, warm lights glowed between buildings. A road cut cleanly through the trees, its asphalt reassuringly cracked and imperfect. Mara stepped onto it. The ground did not shift. She turned once more, scanning the tree line. For a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw movement deeper in the woods. A familiar silhouette. A hand raised, not in warning, not in command, but in farewell. Then it was gone. The forest was only a forest again. Mara faced forward. Each step toward the village felt lighter than the last. Not free of consequence, not cleansed of history, but no longer bound to repeat it. Somewhere behind her, far below roots and stone, rooms that had fed on return collapsed into themselves for the final time. And nothing reached out to stop her. Morning arrived without ceremony. Mara awoke to pale light slipping through thin curtains and the unfamiliar weight of a borrowed blanket. For several seconds, she lay still, cataloging sensations the way one does after surviving something violent. The firmness of the mattress beneath her, the quiet hum of electricity in the walls, the ordinary ache of muscles overused rather than violated. A room. A real one. The guest bedroom was small and tidy, its contents chosen for comfort rather than symbolism. A wooden chair. A lamp with a chipped ceramic base. A bookshelf half filled with paperbacks whose spines had softened with rereading. Nothing watched her. Nothing waited. Her thumb throbbed. Mara lifted her hand. The scar had settled into itself overnight. No longer raw, no longer bleeding. It had not vanished. The crescent was still there, pale against her skin, as precise as if it had been drawn deliberately. She touched it. No voice answered. Downstairs, the muted sounds of life filtered up, cups clinking, water running. The low murmur of a radio playing a morning program that assumed the world had continuity. Mara dressed slowly, choosing the same clothes she had slept in, grounding herself in the friction of fabric and the weight of her boots. When she stepped into the hallway, the floorboard creaked beneath her foot. The sound made her pause. Then she smiled despite herself. The kitchen smelled of coffee and toasted bread. Lena stood at the counter, hair still damp, sleeves pushed up as she worked with easy familiarity. She glanced over her shoulder and nodded, as if Mara's presence was not a surprise, but a continuation. "Sleep?" Lena asked. "Yes," Mara said, and meant more than the word aloud. A mug appeared in her hands. The warmth seeped into her palms, steady and unremarkable. She wrapped her fingers around it, feeling the heat anchor her. They sat at the small kitchen table, the silence between them companionable rather than strained. Outside the window, the village went about its morning business. Doors opening, a bicycle rattling past, a dog barking with purpose. "You can stay another night," Lena said, not looking at her. "Or longer. People pass through here sometimes and need a pause. Nobody asks too much." Mara considered the offer. The old pull stirred faintly, not toward Keller House, not toward repetition, but toward disappearing again, toward becoming untraceable. The instinct was familiar, comfortable in its own way. She flexed her hand, watching the scar catch the light. "I think I need to be seen," she said finally. For a while, Lena nodded, accepting that too. Later, walking alone through the village, Mara felt eyes on her. Not the consuming attention of the house, but the casual noticing of strangers sharing space. She passed shop windows and caught her reflection layered over goods for sale. Her face, thinner than she remembered, eyes clearer. Hers alone. At the edge of town, she found a small footpath leading toward the hills. A trail marker stood there, freshly painted, its arrow pointing outward. Beneath it, someone had scratched an old symbol into the wood. Faint, half erased, the square with a line through it. Mara stared at it for a long moment. The symbol did not pulse. It did not call. It was just a mark left behind by something that no longer had authority. She reached into her pocket. The keys were gone. No weight. No metal. Nothing she had not chosen to carry. Mara turned away from the trail and walked back toward the village, toward noise and warmth and the complicated work of continuing. Behind her, the hills held their silence. And far below, in places where rooms had once remembered her better than she remembered herself, there was only collapse, compressed into soil, into absence, into a story that could no longer repeat. The scar on her thumb remained, not as a lock, not as a summons, but as proof that she had been shaped and had chosen, at last, to stop being held. The bus arrived late and left on time. Mara watched it pull away from the village square, its diesel breath lingering in the cool morning air. The route number meant nothing to her. That felt right. She took the seat by the window and rested her forehead briefly against the glass, letting the vibration of the engine smooth the sharp edges of thought. The road unwound through hills and farmland, past fences that existed only to suggest order. The landscape did not repeat itself. Each bend revealed something slightly different. New trees, new angles of light, the subtle variations that made travel feel like movement rather than return. Her phone buzzed once. No missed calls. No voicemails made of breathing. No messages that knew her old name. Signal held steady. At a stoplight outside a larger town, she caught her reflection again in the window. The scar on her thumb was visible where her hand rested against the seat, pale and definite. She did not hide it. The bus dropped her near a train station that was very much open, bright signage, digital boards ticking through destinations with cheerful authority. The smell of coffee and oil and human impatience filled the air. Life in transit, not in orbit. Mara bought a ticket without overthinking it. A city she had never lived in. A name unconnected to her past. The act felt neither rebellious nor afraid. Just deliberate. On the platform, she stood among strangers, all of them facing forward, all of them waiting for something that would arrive whether they wanted it or not. When the train came, it did not hesitate. It opened its doors and expected to be boarded. Mara stepped inside. As the train pulled away, the countryside slipped backward, dissolving into motion. For a brief, irrational moment, she imagined seeing a house among the trees, a pale shape with dark windows, watching from a distance. There was nothing there. The thought passed. She closed her eyes. Sleep came easily this time, unbroken by knocks or voices or the sense of being counted. When she dreamed, it was of open spaces and unfinished paths, of doors that remained closed because they no longer needed to open. The scar on her thumb tingled once, then went still. Somewhere, far from tracks and stations and villages that existed on maps, the last pressure of Kellerhouse finally released. Not with a sound, not with ceremony, but with the quiet inevitability of something no longer sustained. Rooms that had fed on return found nothing left to hold, and so they stayed closed. For good.